The last thing the radio recorded was not a human voice, but a mechanical shriek that split eardrums. Ava gripped the gunwale of the Boston whaler, her knuckles white against the fiberglass. The Atlantic Ocean, usually a churning chaotic gray off the coast of Newfoundland, was unnervingly flat. It looked less like water and more like a sheet of hammered lead, stretching endlessly toward the horizon. The air was cold, biting at her exposed cheeks, but she did not feel the chill. All she could feel was the adrenaline pumping through her veins, a hot, electric current that made her hands tremble. Station to Ava. Come in, Ava. The radio crackled on the console, the voice of Michael Chun cutting through the heavy silence. He sounded small, tinny, and terrified. Telemetry is showing a massive pressure drop. The storm front is moving faster than predicted. You need to RTB. Now. Ava ignored him. She stared into the dark water, her eyes fixed on the sonar display. The screen was a mess of red and orange blobs, a chaotic swarm that defied every algorithm in the software. Ava! Michael's voice rose an octave. Did you hear me? Turn around. I see a knot, Michael, she whispered, though she knew the microphone would pick it up. She reached out and adjusted the gain on the hydrophone. You would not believe what I am seeing. The migration patterns. They re-wrong. They re-all wrong. She looked up from the screen to the water. 100 yards off the starboard bow, a disturbance broke the oily surface. It was not the graceful arc of a right whale breaching for air. It was a sharp, violent displacement of water, as if something massive had simply punched its way up from the deep. A dark mass, slick and black, crested the wave. It moved with a terrifying velocity, cutting a perfect straight line through the water before stopping dead. Zero inertia. Physics did not work like that. Biology did not work like that. They are not drifting, Ava said into the radio, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and manic excitement. They are coordinating. SA-pack behavior, but tighter, instantaneous. Ava, the sensors are going haywire back here. Michael pleaded. The seismic monitors are picking up tremors. Not from the earth. From the water. Right where you are. Get out of there. Ava looked at her hand. It was hovering over the throttle. She knew the protocol. Solo mission, deteriorating conditions, anomalous readings. It was the trifecta for an immediate abort. Every survival instinct she had honed over 10 years of marine biology screamed at her to slam the throttle forward and race back to the safety of Fogo Island. But the scientist in her was paralyzed by the impossible. If she left now, no one would believe the data. The sonar ghosts would be dismissed as equipment failure. She was sitting on the precipice of the greatest discovery in marine history. A new species? A dormant evolutionary offshoot? I need 5 minutes, she said, her voice hardening. Am deploying the tow cam. I need visual confirmation. Negative. Ava, do not. She reached over and clicked the radio off. The silence that followed was absolute, heavier than the ocean itself. She was not just observing anymore. She was trespassing. She moved to the stern, unclipping the heavy camera rig. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She lowered the camera into the black water. The cable hissed as it played out. She watched the monitor on the console. The water was murky, filled with particulate matter, but then the shapes appeared. They were massive, larger than the 50-ton whales she usually tracked. And they were everywhere. They were not swimming. They were arranging themselves. Below her boat, in the crushing dark, the shadows shifted, forming a perfect, equidistant circle. A sudden, deep thrumming vibration traveled up through the hull of the boat, vibrating through the soles of her boots and rattling her teeth. It was not the sound of a biological creature. It was a low-frequency hum, resonant and precise. Ava stared at the water. The circle was closing. The ocean around the boat began to boil. It was not heat. It was sound. The cavitation bubbles fizzed and popped on the surface, creating a white froth that surrounded the small vessel. The Boston whaler, usually stable and reliable, began to spin slowly, caught in a vortex generated by the massive shapes circling beneath. Ava abandoned the camera. She scrambled to the console, her fingers slipping on the controls. The thrill of discovery had evaporated, replaced by a cold, sharp dread. She had made a mistake. Terrible, arrogant mistake. Okay, going home, she muttered to herself, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. She turned the key in the ignition. The engine sputtered, coughed, and died. No. She turned the key again. The starter motor clicked frantically, a dry, dead sound against the rising hum from the water. She checked the gauges. The battery was full. The fuel was full. But the electronics were flickering, the LCD screens warping and distorting as if subjected to a massive magnetic field. The humming grew louder. It shifted pitch, rising from a felt vibration to an audible tone. It was a grinding, rhythmic noise, like heavy stones being dragged over a metal grate. Grind, click, grind, click. Ava grabbed the emergency flare gun. Her hands were shaking so badly she almost dropped the cartridge. She loaded it and aimed straight up, pulling the trigger. The flare shot into the gray sky, a pathetic streak of red phosphorus that sputtered and died before it even reached its apex. The boat lurched violently to the port side. Ava was thrown against the railing, the breath knocked out of her. She scrambled up, looking over the side. They were surfacing. Not one, but 6 of them. They broke the surface simultaneously, rising like monoliths. They did not look like whales anymore. Up close, the illusion of biology shattered. The skin was too smooth, too matte. It absorbed the light rather than reflecting it. There were no barnacles, no scars, no imperfections. They were perfect, obsidian obelisks towering 10 feet out of the water, encircling her boat in a tight, inescapable ring. The sound changed again. The grinding stopped, replaced by a high-pitched whine that drilled into Ava's skull. She screamed, covering her ears, but the sound did not come from outside. It felt like it was originating inside her head. It was the sound of a dentist's drill amplified 1,000 times. A trickle of warm liquid ran from her nose. She wiped it away with the back of her hand and stared at the red smear. Blood. She crawled back to the radio, her vision blurring. She fumbled with the switch, turning it back on. "Michael!" she screamed, her voice breaking. "Michael, they re-jamming the electronics. My engine is dead. They trapped me." Static was the only answer, but beneath the static there was a pattern. A digital, rhythmic chirping that synchronized with the throbbing pain in her temples. She looked up. The monoliths were moving closer. The circle was tightening. The water between them and the boat was gone, displaced by their bulk. They were crushing the space around her. Ava grabbed the boat hook, wielding it like a spear. It was a ridiculous, primitive gesture against the size of the things surrounding her, but she had nothing else. She backed up against the center console, swinging the hook outward. "Get back!" she yelled, the words torn from her throat. "Get away!" One of the shapes moved. It did not lunge. It simply slid forward, the black matte surface inches from the boat. Ava swung the hook with all her strength, aiming for where an eye should be. The metal tip struck the surface of the creature. There was no soft thud of flesh. There was a hard, metallic clank that reverberated up her arms, jarring her bones. The hook skidded off the surface, leaving not a scratch. The impact seemed to trigger a reaction. The high-pitched whine spiked into a scream. The boat's windshield shattered, raining safety glass over Ava. She collapsed to the deck, curling into a ball, clutching her bleeding ears. The pain was absolute, a white-hot lance driving through her brain. She could not think. She could not move. She could only scream along with the machine. Ava lay on the fiberglass deck, gasping for air. The world was spinning. Her vision was a tunnel of gray and red. The sound had dropped back down to a low, throbbing bass that rattled her ribs, but the reprieve was only physical. The psychological horror was just beginning. Through the gaps in the railing, she watched the creature she had struck. The surface of the black monolith was changing. It rippled like ferrofluid reacting to a magnet. A seam appeared, a perfect vertical line running down the center of the mass. With a wet, sucking sound, the skin retracted. Ava retched. Underneath the mimicry of blubber and skin, there was no flesh. There was a nightmare of engineering. Layers of synthetic muscle fibers, gray and glistening, were woven over a chassis of dull, corroded metal. Strange, bioluminescent lights pulsed in rhythmic patterns, blue, amber, violet, running along visible conduits. It looked ancient. The metal was pitted and scarred, not by battle, but by time. Centuries of time. These were not animals. They were not even modern technology. They were artifacts, relics of something that had been prowling these waters since before humanity had learned to forge steel. Drones, she whispered, the word tasting like copper and ash. They just collectors. She realized with a terrifying clarity that she was not being hunted for food. Predator killed and ate. This was different. This was an interrogation. The exposed machinery of the creature shifted. A dish-like apparatus extended from the center of the synthetic muscle. It swiveled, focusing directly on Ava. The radio crackled to life again. Not Michael's voice. Not static. It was her own voice. Migration patterns. Wrong. It was playing back her words from minutes ago, but chopped up, rearranged, synthesized. Patterns? Coordinating? 5 minutes. The creature was learning. It was processing her language. Ava dragged herself up. Her eyes fell on the hydrophone equipment. The speaker was vibrating violently. An idea, desperate and suicidal, formed in her concussion-addled brain. These things communicated through sound. They used it as a weapon, as a scanner, as a language. If she could overload their input, maybe she could stun them. Maybe she could break the circle. She grabbed the hydrophone cable and plugged it into the boat's PA system, usually used to shout instructions to divers. She cranked the volume to the maximum. Then she grabbed the microphone. "You want sound?" she hissed, blood dripping from her chin onto the console. "Take it." She keyed the mic and held the hydrophone receiver right next to the PA speaker. Feedback loop. An ear-splitting squeal erupted from the speakers. A chaotic, exponential rise in frequency that tore through the air. It was an acoustic weapon, raw and uncontrolled. The effect was instantaneous. The lights on the drone creature flared blindingly bright. The creature recoiled, the synthetic muscle spasming. The circle broke for a fraction of a second. "Yes!" Ava screamed, reaching for the ignition key again. But the victory was a lie. The creature did not retreat. The dish apparatus on its chest pulsed. It absorbed the screeching feedback. The blue lights turned a deep, angry crimson. The sound from the PA system did not just stop. It was sucked out of the air. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. The drone reoriented itself. The other 5 mimicked the motion. They all opened their outer shells, exposing the same complex, ancient machinery. 6 dishes focused on her. They transmitted. It was not a noise this time. It was a data packet delivered directly into her nervous system. Ava's body seized. Her back arched, her muscles locking rigid. It was not just pain. It was an invasion. Images flashed behind her eyes at blinding speed. Star charts she did not recognize. Depths of the ocean no human had ever seen. Geometric cities built in the crushing dark. They were not attacking her. They were downloading her. Ava lay paralyzed on the deck, staring up at the gray sky. She could not feel her hands or feet. She was floating in a sea of agony. But within that agony, there was a strange, cold logic. The images flashing in her mind slowed down. She felt the entities probing her memories. They rifled through her childhood in St. John's, her studies at Dalhousie, the smell of her mother's cooking, the equations of whale migration she had memorized. They were stripping her bare, digitizing her consciousness layer by layer. The pain, she realized, came from the resistance. Her biology was fighting the intrusion. Her brain was trying to reject the foreign code being forced into it. They do not understand pain, she realized. To them, I am just a hard drive with an incompatible format. She looked at the creature towering above her. The red light pulsed in time with her own heartbeat. It was waiting, could not finish the transfer while she was insulated, while she was protected. Her eyes drifted to her chest. The bright orange life jacket. It was filled with foam. It was a barrier. Kept her buoyant, kept her separated from their medium. The acoustic waves were being dampened by the safety gear. The data stream was corrupted by the static of her survival instinct. The realization washed over her with the force of a tidal wave. They were not going to let her go. They could not. She had seen them. She was part of the dataset now. There was no escape. There was only the end of the pain. The scream on the radio, the one Michael would hear later, the one the investigators would analyze for years. It was not a scream of death. It was the sound of formatting. Ava's trembling hand moved to the buckles of her life jacket. Click. The first buckle came undone. The crimson lights on the drones softened, shifting back to an expectant amber. The pressure in her head lessened slightly. They understood. Click. The second buckle. She sat up. Her body felt light, detached. The fear was gone, replaced by a hollow, serene acceptance. She stripped the orange vest off and let it drop to the deck. It looked alien there, a bright splash of color in a world of gray and black. She stood up. The boat rocked gently. The drones waited, their internal machinery whirring softly, a choir of clockwork angels. I understand, Ava said softly. Her voice did not tremble. You just want to know. She stepped onto the gunnel. The water looked black and thick, like oil. It was no longer cold. It radiated a humming warmth, the heat of 1,000,000 terabytes of processing power. She looked at the radio one last time. She hoped Michael would not listen too closely. She hoped her parents would not hear the end. Ava stepped forward. She did not splash when she hit the water. She slipped beneath the surface with barely a ripple. The moment the water closed over her head, the connection was complete. The acoustic interface was direct. There was no air to dampen the signal. Her mouth opened to scream, but no air came out. Instead, her lungs filled with the vibrating water, and her vocal cords synchronized with the frequency of the machines. On the boat, the radio picked up the final transmission. It started as a gasp, then twisted, warped, and ascended into a high-pitched mechanical shriek, a burst of pure, compressed data. The drones closed their shells, sealing the ancient metal back under the false skin of whales. They turned in unison, their job complete, and dove into the crushing dark, taking the new file with them. The Boston whaler drifted alone in the silence, the radio static hissing softly over the empty ocean.